The letter trembled in Jane O'Malley's gloved hands as the stagecoach rattled through the golden prairie toward Willow Creek, Montana territory. May 1898, the date that would change everything. Her entire future depended on a man she'd never met, a photograph she'd stared at for months, and promises made in carefully penned letters that had traveled across a continent. "Last stop coming up, miss," the driver called down. "Willow Creek in 10 minutes. Jane tucked the latest letter from Nathan Granger back into her reticule and smoothed the wrinkles from her traveling dress, the nicest one she owned, saved for this moment. 23 years of life in Boston had not prepared her for the vast openness of the West, the endless sky that seemed to swallow everything beneath it. The stagecoach lurched to a halt before a dusty main street lined with wooden buildings. Jane peered through the small window, searching for a tall figure with chestnut hair and kind eyes like the photograph she'd memorized. Her heart pounded against her ribs. What if he took one look at her and decided she wasn't what he wanted? What if her city manners and lack of frontier skills made her unsuitable as a rancher's wife? The driver opened the door. "Willow Creek, folks, end of the line." Jane stepped down carefully, clutching her small carpet bag. The other passengers dispersed quickly, leaving her alone before the stagecoach office. Dust swirled around her ankles as she scanned the street anxiously. "Miss O'Malley?" She turned toward the deep voice, and her breath caught. Nathan Granger stood before her, hat in hand, taller than she'd imagined from his photograph. His face was more weathered, his shoulders broader, his eyes a clearer blue than the daguerreotype had captured. The months of correspondence hadn't prepared her for the reality of him. "Mr. Granger," she managed, extending her hand, "it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person." He took her hand gently. "The pleasure's mine, Miss O'Malley." His voice held a slight hesitation that made her stomach tighten with worry. "I hope I haven't kept you waiting," she said, filling the awkward silence. "No, not at all." He cleared his throat. "I've got the wagon just over there. Is this all your luggage?" Jane glanced at her small carpet bag. "Yes, I travel light." Something flickered in his expression, concern. Perhaps disappointment, but he quickly masked it with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Let me take that for you." As they walked to the wagon, Jane felt the weight of unspoken words between them. This wasn't the warm welcome she'd imagined during those long nights reading his letters by candlelight. Nathan helped her onto the wagon seat, his touch polite but distant. The silence stretched between them as he flicked the reins and the horses pulled forward. "It's a beautiful country," Jane offered, watching the town fall away behind them. "Your letters didn't do it justice." "It can be harsh, too," Nathan replied. "Winter's brutal. Summer brings drought some years. Spring floods others." He glanced at her city dress and gloves. "It's not like Boston." "I'm prepared for difficulties, Mr. Granger." "Nathan, please." Nathan. His name felt intimate on her lips. "And I'm Jane." He nodded but said nothing more. The rolling landscape passed in uncomfortable silence until he finally spoke again. "Jane, I need to be honest with you. Things have changed since I last wrote." Her heart sank. "Oh?" "The ranch is struggling. Cattle prices have fallen. We had a hard winter, lost nearly a quarter of the herd." His knuckles whitened on the reins. "It's not what I promised you in my letters." "I didn't come for promises of wealth," Jane said carefully. "No, but you came for security at least, a home, a husband who could provide." His jaw tightened. "I'm not sure I can offer that anymore." The wagon crested a hill, and below them stretched a valley with a modest ranch house, barn, and corrals. Smoke curled from the chimney, and cattle dotted the distant pastures. It was smaller than she'd imagined, but somehow perfect in its simplicity. "Is that your ranch?" Jane asked softly. "What's left of it?" Nathan's voice was tight. "The house needs work. The barn roof leaks, and He trailed off, then straightened his shoulders. "I'd understand if you wanted to return to Boston. I could arrange passage back when the stagecoach comes through next week." Jane stared at him, the meaning of his words sinking in. He was offering to send her away, after months of letters, of building a future in her mind, of leaving everything she knew behind. He was suggesting she simply return, as though none of it mattered. "Is that what you want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan didn't meet her eyes. "I want what's best for you. This isn't what you signed up for. Shouldn't I be the judge of that?" The wagon rolled into the ranch yard, and a young boy of about 12 dashed out from the barn, followed by an older man with a silver-streaked beard. "Uncle Nate, you're back!" The boy skidded to a halt when he spotted Jane. "Is this her? Is this your mail lady?" Despite her distress, Jane couldn't help but smile. "Mail lady?" Nathan's face reddened. "My mail order bride. This is my nephew Daniel, and my foreman, Frank Miller." Frank touched the brim of his hat. "Madam, welcome to Granger Ranch." Daniel bounced on his toes. "Are you staying? Uncle Nate's been fixing up the house for weeks. He even put curtains in your room and everything." Jane glanced at Nathan, whose expression had grown even more uncomfortable. "Has he now?" "Daniel, take Miss O'Malley's bag to the guest room," Nathan instructed. "Frank, how's that fence in the north pasture coming?" As the two hurried off to their tasks, Jane turned to face Nathan fully. "You've been preparing for me. I didn't want you arriving to a complete disaster," he admitted. "But that doesn't change the facts." "Which facts are those exactly?" Jane stepped closer. "That times are hard? That ranching is difficult? I didn't expect paradise, Nathan." "You expected a husband who could take care of you. I expected a partner." Jane held his gaze steadily. "In your letters, you spoke of building something together. Has that changed?" Nathan sighed, rubbing his jaw where a day's stubble darkened his skin. "Jane, I've seen what this life does to city women. My sister-in-law, Daniel's mother, couldn't bear it. She left my brother and their son behind, went back east 3 years ago." Understanding dawned on Jane. "And you're afraid I'll do the same. Daniel can't lose another mother figure, and I—" He stopped himself. "It would be better if you knew now, before expectations are set." Jane looked toward the modest ranch house. It needed paint and repairs, but smoke rose cheerfully from the chimney, and wildflowers grew by the front steps. She thought of the tiny Boston apartment she'd shared with 3 other working girls, of the textile mill where she'd labored 14 hours a day, of the emptiness after her parents died. "I'd like a week," she said finally. "A week? To show you I can adapt to ranch life, that I'm not your sister-in-law. After that, if you still want me to leave, I will." Nathan studied her face, searching for something. Whatever he saw made him nod slowly. "A week, then." "Thank you." Jane lifted her chin. "Now, would you be kind enough to show me to my room? It's been a very long journey." The guest room was small but clean, with simple furniture and the promised curtains blue gingham that matched the quilt on the narrow bed. Jane sat on the edge of the mattress after Nathan left, finally allowing herself a moment of privacy to process her situation. She'd come all this way, only to find the man who had courted her through letters was having second thoughts. Her chest ached with disappointment, but beneath it burned a determination she hadn't known she possessed. She hadn't fled the suffocating confines of Boston society and factory life to be dismissed without a chance. Jane unpacked her meager belongings, changed into a simpler dress, and headed for the kitchen. If she had 1 week to prove herself, she wouldn't waste a minute of it. The next morning, Jane rose before dawn. In Boston, she'd started work at the textile mill at 5 each morning. Early rising was no hardship. She found the kitchen and set about making breakfast, using the skills she'd learned from her mother. By the time boots sounded on the porch, she had coffee brewing, biscuits baking, and eggs ready to fry. Nathan stopped short in the doorway, surprised to find her at the stove. "You're up early." "Good morning to you too," Jane replied, sliding eggs onto a plate. "I hope you're hungry." Daniel bounded in behind his uncle, his eyes widening at the spread. You made all this, Miss O'Malley? Jane, please. And yes, though I'll need someone to show me where things are kept so I can plan better meals going forward. Nathan accepted the plate she handed him with a puzzled expression. You don't need to do this. I need to eat, same as you. Seems practical to share the work. Jane sat down with her own plate. I thought I might take inventory of the pantry today. Perhaps start a kitchen garden if you have seeds. A garden would be nice, Daniel said around a mouthful of biscuit. We haven't had fresh vegetables since before winter. Nathan frowned at his nephew. Don't talk with your mouth full. To Jane, he added more gently, you don't have to prove anything. I'm not proving anything. I'm living. Jane met his eyes steadily. That's what I came here to do. After breakfast, Nathan reluctantly showed Jane around the ranch before heading out to work with Frank. The house was larger than it appeared from outside 4 bedrooms, though only 3 were in use, a decent kitchen, a sitting room with worn but comfortable furniture, and a small study where Nathan kept the ranch books. Everything was functional but sparse, lacking the feminine touches that would make it truly a home. Jane spent the morning cleaning and organizing the kitchen, then ventured outside to explore the grounds. She found a patch of turned earth behind the house that had once been a garden and set to work clearing the weeds. The physical labor felt good after days of sitting in the stagecoach. What are you doing? Nathan's voice came from behind her as the afternoon sun beat down on her back. Jane straightened, wiping sweat from her brow with her sleeve. Preparing the garden. Your soil is surprisingly good here. He frowned at her dirty hands and flushed face. It's too hot for this kind of work. You'll make yourself sick. I worked 14 hours a day in a mill where the air was so thick with cotton fibers we could barely breathe, Jane replied evenly. This is pleasant by comparison. Nathan's expression softened slightly. At least come get some water. She followed him to the well, accepting the dipper of cool water gratefully. Thank you. Why did you answer my advertisement? Nathan asked suddenly. You never really explained in your letters. Jane considered the question as she handed the dipper back. The mill was killing me slowly. My parents were gone. I had no prospects for marriage in Boston. She looked out over the rolling grasslands. And your letters, they spoke of building something meaningful, of partnership. She smiled faintly. Also, you mentioned having a library. A reluctant smile tugged at Nathan's lips. It's hardly a library, just a shelf of books. More than I had access to in Boston. He studied her for a long moment. You're not what I expected. Is that good or bad? I'm still deciding. But his eyes held less reservation than before. Dinner's at 6. Daniel will show you where to wash up. That evening, Jane joined Nathan and Daniel for a simple meal. Daniel chattered enthusiastically about his day, while Nathan remained quietly observant. After dinner, Nathan pulled out a well-worn copy of Dickens and read aloud while Jane mended a pile of socks she'd found in need of attention. The quiet domesticity of the scene brought an unexpected lump to her throat. This was what she'd imagined during those long nights in Boston, not wealth or grandeur, but simple companionship, purpose, belonging. As days passed, Jane fell into the rhythm of ranch life. She rose early to prepare breakfast, tended her fledgling garden, learned to milk the cow under Frank's patient instruction, and discovered the satisfaction of creating order from chaos as she tackled the long-neglected house. Nathan remained reserved but watchful, his initial skepticism gradually giving way to cautious respect. On the 4th day, disaster struck. Jane was hanging laundry when she heard Daniel's frantic shout from the corral. She ran toward the sound to find Nathan pinned beneath a fallen section of fence, his face contorted in pain. The post gave way, Daniel explained tearfully as Jane dropped to her knees beside Nathan. We were fixing the corral and it just collapsed. Nathan, can you hear me? Jane touched his face gently. He grimaced. My leg. Think it's broken. Jane assessed the situation quickly. Daniel, run get Frank. Tell him to bring the wagon as close as possible. As Daniel sprinted off, Jane examined the heavy fence section trapping Nathan. I'm going to try to lift this enough for you to pull free. Ready? Nathan nodded grimly. Jane braced herself and lifted with every ounce of strength she possessed. The fence moved just enough for Nathan to drag himself clear before it crashed back down. How did you, Nathan began, his face pale with pain and surprise. Cotton bales aren't light, Jane replied, already examining his leg. This is definitely broken. We need to get you to a doctor. By the time Frank arrived with the wagon, Jane had torn strips from her petticoat to stabilize Nathan's leg. Together they managed to get him into the wagon bed. I'll take him to Doc Wilson in town, Frank said. Daniel, you stay here with Miss O'Malley. I'm coming too, Jane said firmly, already climbing into the wagon. Jane, you don't need, Nathan began. Don't argue with me, Nathan Granger. She settled beside him, cradling his head in her lap. Daniel, mind the house. We'll be back as soon as we can. The journey to town was excruciating for Nathan, each bump in the road drawing muffled groans despite his attempts to remain stoic. Jane stroked his hair and murmured encouragement, her heart aching for his pain. Dr. Wilson confirmed the break was clean but serious. He'll need complete rest for at least 6 weeks, he told Jane as he finished setting the leg. No weight on it at all for the first month. Nathan's face fell. 6 weeks? The ranch can't. The ranch will manage, Jane interrupted. Frank knows what needs doing, and I can help. You can't run a cattle ranch, Nathan protested weakly. I don't intend to. I intend to run your household while you heal, and Frank handles the cattle. She fixed him with a determined look. Unless you prefer I leave now that my week is nearly up? Nathan held her gaze for a long moment before the fight went out of him. No, he said quietly. I don't want you to leave. Back at the ranch, Jane transformed the sitting room into a temporary bedroom for Nathan, placing his bed where he could see out the window and reach books from the shelf. She coordinated with Frank on ranch operations, keeping track of supplies and finances while managing the household and caring for Nathan. To her surprise, Nathan proved to be a terrible patient, restless, frustrated by his helplessness and occasionally short-tempered. Yet, in his vulnerability, the walls between them began to crumble. During long afternoons when pain kept him awake, they talked as they never had before. Tell me about your brother, Jane said one day as she changed the linens on his bed. Daniel's father. Nathan's expression grew distant. John was 4 years older than me, stronger, smarter, more determined. He built this ranch from nothing after the war. A sad smile crossed his face. Fell in love with a beautiful woman passing through on her way to San Francisco. Somehow convinced her to stay and marry him. Daniel's mother. Elizabeth, Nathan nodded. She tried, I'll give her that. 3 years she stuck it out, but she wasn't made for this life, the isolation, the hardships. When she left, it nearly destroyed John. What happened to him? Jane asked gently. Pneumonia 2 winters ago. He worked himself sick trying to save the herd during a blizzard. Nathan's voice roughened. I promised him I'd take care of Daniel, make the ranch succeed. Jane sat beside him on the edge of the bed. Is that why you advertised for a bride? For Daniel's sake? Partly, Nathan met her eyes, but also because it gets lonely out here. Because I wanted what John had found. At least for a while, someone to share the burden and the beauty of this place. Then why were you so ready to send me away? Nathan reached for her hand. Because I was afraid. Afraid you'd be another Elizabeth, that you'd realize your mistake and leave us both heartbroken. His fingers tightened around hers. I thought it would hurt less to end it before it began. And now, Jane hardly dared breathe. Now I can't imagine this place without you in it. The weeks of Nathan's recovery brought them closer in ways neither had anticipated. Jane read to him in the evenings after Daniel went to bed, their heads close together over the pages. Nathan taught her about cattle breeding and ranch economics, impressed by her quick mind and practical suggestions. They argued sometimes, Jane's stubbornness matching his own, but always found their way back to understanding. By the time Nathan could move with crutches, Jane had transformed the ranch house. Curtains brightened every window, the kitchen garden flourished, and the rooms had been thoroughly cleaned and organized. More importantly, laughter filled the spaces that had once held only silence. One evening in late July, Nathan hobbled out to the porch where Jane sat watching the sunset. He lowered himself carefully onto the bench beside her. "Frank says the herd looks good," Jane commented. "Better than expected after everything. Thanks to your bookkeeping. Turns out we weren't as bad off as I thought." Nathan turned to face her. "Your week's been up for quite some time now." Jane's heart skipped. "Are you asking me to leave?" "No." Nathan took her hand. "I'm asking you to stay, permanently, as my wife." "I thought the offer was rescinded when I arrived," Jane said softly. "I was a fool." Nathan's blue eyes held hers intently. "Jane O'Malley, will you marry me? Not because of some agreement made through letters, but because I've fallen in love with the remarkable woman you are." Jane's eyes filled with tears. "Yes." Nathan pulled her close, his kiss tender and full of promise. When they finally drew apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'm sorry I almost sent you away." "You never could have," Jane whispered. "From the moment I stepped off that stagecoach, I knew this was where I belonged." Nathan smiled, stroking her cheek. "You've already come home." They married 2 weeks later in the small church in Willow Creek, with Daniel beaming as he stood beside his uncle. Frank served as witness, and the handful of neighboring ranchers and townspeople who attended cheered when Nathan kissed his bride. The ranch flourished under their joint care. Jane's practical sense combined with Nathan's experience brought stability they'd not known before. By the following spring, Nathan's leg had healed completely. The herd had grown, and Jane had news of her own to share. She told him on a golden evening as they sat on the porch, watching Daniel exercise a young colt in the corral. "Nathan," she said, taking his hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach, "we're going to have a baby." His face transformed with wonder and joy. "A baby?" "You're certain?" Jane nodded, laughing as he swept her into a careful embrace. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday." "Daniel will be beside himself," Nathan murmured against her hair. "He's been asking for a brother or sister since the day after our wedding." "This child will have the family I always wanted," Jane said, nestling against her husband's chest. "A home filled with love and purpose." Nathan kissed her softly. "When I wrote that advertisement, I never imagined finding someone like you. I thought I was offering a woman shelter, but you're the one who built us a true home." "We built it together," Jane corrected him. "Partners, remember?" As twilight deepened over Granger Ranch, they remained on the porch, planning their future while Daniel chattered excitedly about becoming a big brother. The challenges of ranch life remained. There would always be droughts and harsh winters, market fluctuations and broken fences, but Jane faced them without fear. She had traveled across a continent seeking a new beginning, only to discover that beginnings weren't found in places, but in people who made space in their hearts for love to grow. In Nathan's arms, with his child growing beneath her heart and their family surrounding her, Jane knew with absolute certainty that she had truly come home. By the following autumn, little Sarah Granger arrived during the first snowfall of the season, her lusty cries filling the ranch house with new life. Daniel appointed himself her protector, while Nathan discovered a softness in himself he hadn't known existed as he cradled his daughter. "She has your eyes," he whispered to Jane as they watched their daughter sleep in her cradle beside their bed. "And your determination," Jane replied with a tired smile. She certainly wasn't going to wait for the doctor to arrive. Nathan kissed her forehead. "You were magnificent." 5 years later, the Granger Ranch had doubled in size. 2 more children joined Sarah Thomas with his father's quiet strength and Emma, whose fiery spirit matched her mother's. Daniel, now 17, had grown into a fine young man who managed portions of the ranch with increasing confidence. On the anniversary of her arrival in Willow Creek, Jane found Nathan waiting for her on the porch after the children were asleep. "I have something for you," he said, leading her to the bench where he'd proposed. He handed her a small wooden box. Inside lay a silver locket with their children's initials engraved on the front. When she opened it, she found a tiny photograph of all of them together, taken in town the previous month. "It's beautiful," Jane whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "You changed everything," Nathan said, clasping the locket around her neck. "When I saw you step down from that stagecoach, so brave and determined despite my cold welcome, I never imagined how completely you would transform our lives." Jane leaned against him, watching the stars emerge above their home. "I was so afraid you'd send me away." "I nearly made the worst mistake of my life," Nathan admitted. "Thank God you're as stubborn as you are beautiful." "We're well matched that way." Jane smiled up at her husband. "I wouldn't change a moment of it. Even the hard times brought us here." As they sat together in the gathering darkness, the lights of their home glowing behind them and the vast Montana night spread before them, Jane felt the same certainty she'd discovered years before. Through all life's hardships and joys, she'd found where she belonged, not in a place, but in the love they'd built together on this wild frontier, one day at a time.